Welcome back to another episode of Bloodstained Backstories. I'm your host, Jace.
And I'm your host, Summer.
Today's story is about George Jonas Stinney Jr., who was an African American boy born on October 21st, 1929. At the age of 14, he was wrongfully convicted and then executed for the murders of two young girls. Let us dig deeper into this sad case involving children and the wrongful death and conviction of a child himself.
In 1944, George Stinney stood 5 feet 1 inch tall and weighed 90 to 95 pounds. He lived in a small home that had a chicken coop in Alcola, South Carolina. He lived with his mother and father and 3 siblings.
George's father worked at the town's sawmill, and the family resided in company housing. Alchula was a small working class town. The white and the black neighbors were separated by the railroad tracks. Their interactions were limited between the white and the blacks, and at this time, schools and churches were still segregated.
On March 23rd, 1944, the bodies of Betty June Vinegar and Mary Emma Thames were found on the African American side of Alcolu in a ditch. The girls failed to return home that night.
George's father assisted in the search, and the girls had died a horrible death. They were both beaten with a weapon, which was reported to be a piece of blunt metal or a railroad spike. They had both suffered blunt force trauma resulting in the penetration of both girls' skulls. The medical examiner reported the wounds had been inflicted by a blunt instrument with the round head about the size of a hammer. The medical examiner also reported that there was no evidence of sexual assault to the younger girls, but she did have slight bruising to her genitalia.
The girls were riding their bicycles looking for flowers when last seen. As the girls rode past the Steiny home, they stopped and asked George and his sister Amy if they knew where to find maypops, a local name for passion flowers. Amy stated she was with George at the time the police later established the murders occurred.
On March 24th, the wire service reported that the sheriff announced the arrest of George Stinney and stated that the boy had confessed and led officers to a hidden piece of iron. John, George's older brother, and George were arrested on suspicion of murdering the girls. John was released by the police, but they held on to George. He was 14 years old and not allowed to see his parents until after the trial and the conviction. The arresting officer, who submitted a handwritten statement, stated, "I arrested a boy named George Stinney. He made a confession and told me where to find a piece of iron. The piece of iron was found about 15 inches from where he said he put in the ditch and about 6 feet from the bicycle."
In 1995, George's seventh grade teacher, a black man, spoke in an interview about George. The teacher recounted, "I remember the day he killed those children. He got into a fight with a girl at school who was his neighbor. In those days, you didn't have to worry about children carrying guns and knives to school, but George carried a little knife, and he scratched this child with his knife. I took him outside, and we went for a little walk, and I talked to him. We went back into the school in a submissive way. He begged for the child's pardon."
George's sister Amy denied all those allegations and contacted the teacher. She asked him why he would say something like that. She stated he told me someone paid him to say it, and Amy did not know who paid him, but those were his exact words, "because they paid me." The teacher died shortly after the interview was published.
Following George's arrest, his father was fired from his job at the sawmill, and the family had to move immediately out of their company housing. The family feared for their safety. George's parents did not see him again before the trial. George had no support in the 81 days in confinement and trial. George was held at a jail in Columbia, which was about 50 miles from Alcolu. Due to the risk of lynching, George was questioned alone without his parents or an attorney. The Sixth Amendment guarantees legal counsel, although this is not routinely observed until 1963, when the United States Supreme Court ruled that it is required to have representation through the course of criminal proceedings.
On April 24th, 1944, the entire proceedings against George, including the jury selection, would take place. Georgia's court-appointed counsel, Charles Plowden, was a tax commissioner that was running for election to a local office.
Plowden did not question the three officers who testified that George confessed to the two murders. He did not try to defend George. Plowden also did not question the prosecutor's presentation of two differing versions of George's verbal confession. In one version, George was attacked by the girls after he tried to help one of them that fell into a ditch, and he killed them in self-defense. In the other version, it was stated he followed the girls, attacking Emma first, then Betty June. There is no written record of George's confession except for the sheriff's statement.
The prosecutors called three witnesses other than the three police officers. They were Reverend Batson, who found the bodies, and two doctors who performed the post-mortem examinations. Discussions about the possibility of rape due to the bruising on Bicknicker's genitalia were allowed.
George's counsel did not call any witnesses, did not cross-examine witnesses, and to top it all off, offered little or even no defense. The trial's presentation lasted only 2.5 hours.
No black Americans were allowed in the courtroom, although there were more than 1,000 white Americans. George was tried before a jury of all white jurors. The jury deliberated for less than 10 minutes and they found George guilty of murder. The judge sentenced George to death by electrocution. There is no transcript of the trial, and no appeal was filed by George's counsel.
George's family, churches, and the NAACP appealed to the governor for clemency due to the age of George. Some pleas came from whites with affirmations of white supremacy, but discomfort at the prospect of someone so young being executed. Others urged the governor to let the execution proceed as planned, which he did. He did visit George in the death house 2 days before his execution on June 14th. The governor wrote a response to one appeal for clemency by stating, "I have just talked with the officer who made the arrest in this case. It may be interesting for you to know that Stinney killed the smaller girl to rape the larger one. Then he killed the larger girl and raped her dead body. 20 minutes later, he returned and attempted to rape her again, but her body was too cold. All of this he admitted himself. It was reported that these claims were not corroborated by the girl's autopsy and that they were merely rumors."
From the time of George's arrest to his execution, his parents were only able to see him one time after the trial while he was held at the Columbia Penitentiary. They were not allowed to see him any other time due to the threat of lynching. The execution of children as young as 14 was virtually unheard of in the United States. Many sources say that George was the youngest person to be executed in the U.S. in the 20th century.
George was executed in 1944 at 7:30 a.m. A Bible had to be used as a booster seat because George was too small for the chair. His arms, legs, and bodies were restrained to the chair. An officer asked George if he had any last words, but he only shook his head and said,
George broke into tears when the executioner pulled a strap from the chair and put it over George's mouth. A face mask was placed over George's face, which did not fit him, and he continued sobbing. The mask slipped off when the lethal electricity was applied, revealing tears streaming down George's face. It was stated years later by a person who witnessed the execution that it was just a rumor that the hood slipped away and that they did not put a Bible underneath him. George was buried in an unmarked grave at the Calvary Baptist Church Cemetery in Lee County, South Carolina.
In 2004, a local historian who grew up in Alcolu started researching the case after he read a newspaper article about it. His research gained the attention of a few lawyers and many other people who contributed countless hours of research and reviewed the historical documents. They found witnesses and evidence to assist in exonerating George.
A few attorneys representing George's family filed a motion for a new trial on October 25th, 2013. If we can get the case reopened, we can go to the judge and say there wasn't any reason to convict this child. There was no evidence to present to the jury. There was no transcript. This case needs to be reopened. This is an injustice that needs to be righted. I'm pretty optimistic that if we can get witnesses to come forward, we'll be successful in court. We hopefully will have witnesses that's going to say that non-family, non-relative witnesses who is going to be able to tie all this in and say that they were basically alibi witnesses. They were there with Mr. Stinney and this did not occur. Stephen Mackenzie, lawyer.
It was stated in interviews there has been a person that has been named as being the culprit who is now deceased. It has been said by that person's family that there was a deathbed confession. It was rumored that the culprit came from a well known prominent white family. Members or a member of that family served on the initial coroner's inquest jury, which had recommended George be prosecuted.
In an amicus brief, it was stated there is compelling evidence that George Stinney was innocent of his crimes for which he was executed in 1944. The prosecutor relied almost exclusively on one piece of evidence to obtain the conviction in this capital case: the unrecorded, unsigned confession of a 14-year-old who was deprived counsel and parental guidance, and whose defense lawyers shockingly who failed to call witnesses or preserve his right to an appeal.
In January 2014, new evidence included testimony by George's siblings that he was with them at the time of the murders. Reverend Francis Batson gave an affidavit that when he found the girls, there was not much blood in or around the ditch, suggesting that they may have been killed elsewhere and moved to the ditch. Wilford Hunter, who was in the prison with George, testified that the teenager told him he had been made to confess and that he always maintained his innocence.
On December 14, 2014, rather than approving a new trial, a circuit court judge vacated George's conviction. It was ruled that he did not receive a fair trial and was not effectively defended, and his Sixth Amendment rights had been violated. The judge also ruled that George's confession was likely coerced and thus inadmissible. The judge found the execution of a 14-year-old constituted cruel and unusual punishment. His attorney failed to call witnesses or to preserve his right to an appeal. In reference to the legal process, the judge stated that no one can justify a 14-year-old child charged, tried, and convicted, and then executed all within 80 days. In essence, not much was done for this child when his life lay in balance.
George's family and civil rights activists celebrated the overturning of George's conviction. The relatives of both the girls expressed disappointment at the court's ruling. They acknowledged that George's execution at the age of 14 is controversial. They never doubted his guilt. A niece to one of the girls claimed that she and her family have extensively researched the case and argues that people read the articles in the newspaper and that they do not know the truth. She also alleges that in the early 1990s, a police officer who arrested George had contacted her and said, "Don't you ever believe that that boy did not kill your aunt?" The family did agree that George did not receive a fair trial and that he should not have received the death penalty.
Since George's exoneration, George Burke Jr., the son of a wealthy white businessman, has been the subject of speculation as a possible suspect of the murders. Burke died 2 or 3 years after the murders of the two girls. George's mother had worked for the Burke family for a brief period of time, and George's sister recalled her mother once coming home saying that Senior Burke had made advances on her. George's father had warned their mother to no longer go back, and George's sister claimed to have heard that the Burke boys framed George because his mother did not want to give it up. The senior Burke conducted an initial search for the girls and was the owner of the area behind the church where the girl's body was found. He was also the foreman of the grand jury that indicted George and has been accused of helping steer the blame off his son and onto George.
George's case has been often referred to in debate over the use of the death penalty in the United States, especially in arguments against the death penalty due to the common belief that George was innocent and wrongfully executed. Can you just imagine, though, being arrested, tried, and executed within 80 days, all within 80 days? Now it just takes even years and years and years to even go to trial.
And it shouldn't have happened without any evidence either. And the
It,
fact that he was 14, today, most 14-year-olds wouldn't be executed. That's more of an adult sentence. So, was he tried as an adult without proper representation? That's not fair to George's family either. And they didn't receive any compensation after he was exonerated, which is also disturbing. They lost their son, their name was dragged through the mud, and then, oops, sorry, we're wrong. And it's okay, don't worry about it. None of that is right in this case. Let
no.
us know what you think about it and this wrongfully convicted and overturned conviction after the fact that the person was already dead. Thanks for tuning in to Bloodstained Backstories. Don't forget to follow us on social media to stay updated, share your thoughts, and connect with fellow crime enthusiasts. You can catch us anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or your go to platform. And make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Join us next week as we uncover another chilling case. Until then, stay safe and stay curious.